Welcome back to the Bird Rights Podcast. This is episode 4. This is now episode 3 of our NFL podcast since we had our emergency roast of Greg Roman yesterday. I'm just joined by Declan today. We were supposed to have Jack Wilhelm on here, but he flaked.
Yeah, bad
So it's
team
just
member
us two
as far as
today.
I'm concerned.
Yeah, we're just gonna run the 2-man today. Pause. But yeah, we're just doing a recap of the wild card weekend, the super wild card weekend. We're gonna go over our thoughts. More focusing on the losing teams and how we see them moving forward in the future, but also looking forward to the winning teams and their matchups next week, which we'll also get to more in our episode 5 pod on Thursday for our predictions and bets. And we'll also recap our bets as well, our lock of the week and stuff like that too, possibly. And then we'll also go over some of the new NFL news. There hasn't been much, but stuff like Sean Payton and Jim Harbaugh, kind of go over that. But anyways, it's just me and Declan today. I'm Zach. Joined by Declan, like I said, 3 times. But we're going to start off by looking at the Seahawks 49ers game. 49ers took the victory like I think most of us, except for me, predicted. 49ers 41, Seahawks 23. The spread was minus 9.5. And yeah, personally, I think it was actually a pretty good game until I think the fourth quarter, which is when the 49ers kind of blew it open. But yeah, how about you, Declan? What do you think?
It was a better game than I expected it to be. For most of the game, most of us expected the Niners to cover that 9.5 points. Zach even said, "I'm picking Seattle, but if Seattle's either going to win a close one or they're going to get blown out."
Blown out, yeah.
And it was close for most of the game until that Nick Bosa forced fumble in the red zone. It was about 23-17 at that time, I think, or it was 24-17. I think it was 23-17. And then Nick Bosa forces that fumble, and the Niners are unstoppable from that point. There's a long Debo touchdown in there, a few sustained drives. And as we said on Friday and predicted, the talent just kind of overwhelmed Seattle at the end. Geno played pretty well. He moved the ball well most of the game. DK Metcalf had a fantastic game. But in the end, it was that there was too much talent at all the position groups for San Francisco, and the Niners moved on pretty easily, and they got 2 extra days of rest going into their next game compared to the Cowboys, so that'll be interesting. Christian McCaffrey made his impact felt. He had a long play to start off the game. He had a touchdown in there. He was a huge contributor, and that is proving to be one of the bigger in-season trades we've seen in quite some time. Kind of reminding me of a different NFC West team who added Von Miller last year. It feels like it's having a similar impact, although edge rushers are more valuable than running backs in most cases. McCaffrey has been huge, and that Niners defense has just been suffocating. And once again, Fred Warner and Nick Bosa. And I want to give a shout out to Charvarius Ward, who had a good game, even though Metcalf kind of went off, but Charvarius Ward was going back and forth between Metcalf and Lockett, and that's a really tough assignment, and he did well. And I think the Niners are positioned as well as anybody in the NFC to make a run at the Super Bowl, and I think they're going to do just that.
Yeah, I completely kind of agree with that after seeing how they played this weekend. Even with Brock Purdy here, I was kind of worried about his playoff, not much playoff experience at all. And obviously he proved me wrong. He had a great game, 18 for 30, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. He was just fantastic. Over the past few weeks that he's been playing, he's just been kind of showcasing all the talent that you'd want out of a quarterback. And I'm kind of, obviously, they took Trey Lance, so they're probably going to stick with him, but, Brock Purdy's definitely an enticing option moving forward if Trey Lance is to, not be, make much improvement next year after coming back from an injury.
Yeah.
But also, like you said, I completely agree. Christian McCaffrey absolutely took over this game on offense with some big plays. He also had a receiving touchdown.
Him and Debo are impossible to take care of. They're so explosive.
And also, just this offensive roster, you can really just plug any of these guys anywhere on the field. I saw a formation on this game on Twitter. It was some photo. They had Debo at running back, They had Christian McCaffrey at wide receiver, and they had like George Kittle on the other side of the field. It's like how do you stop that kind of?
You
You don't
can't.
know what's coming. You know, they
Everyone's
could
too versatile.
easily pass it or run it because Debo can run it. McCaffrey's an amazing receiver. It's just like everyone on this offense can do everything,
Yeah.
which just makes it even harder to stop them.
Yeah. I think
Um,
Ayuk is even fantastic. I think Ayuk could be a wide receiver one on a number of teams.
mhm.
And he even is kind of a, he takes some jet sweeps. He's kind of a gadgety guy, but because of the way the Niners run this offense, Ayuk's considered their most like traditional player because he mostly seems like a regular receiver when everyone else is, Kittle's lining up at fullback and tight end, and Debo and McCaffrey are lining up in both places. So an offense that's such a headache to guard with Shanahan calling the plays, and I'm excited to see where they go. I want to say one thing on Brock Purdy real quick though.
Mhm.
I don't think his numbers were fantastic.
Yeah.
I don't he certainly started the game rough. He got a little better, and he's a very good improviser in the pocket. Like he can buy you a little bit of time. He's not a crazy athlete, but he can buy you time in a way Jimmy couldn't, which has been really big for the 49ers. However, I don't think he played particularly well in that game. Seattle's
Mhm.
defense just isn't all that talented, and he had some
Yeah.
really bad misses. He had two early that should have been picked off, a few misses, and most of his, he had like 330 passing yards. Almost half of that came on two plays where he threw the ball about 10 yards, 15 yards, and then Debo and McCaffrey took off afterwards. Not that,
Yeah.
the Niners don't need elite high level playmaking from the quarterback to win these games, but I think it's worth noting for the future that I think they can win a Super Bowl this year with Brock Purdy. With that
Mhm.
said, I would still have Lance in pole position to get that starting job next year. I
Yeah.
suppose if you win a Super Bowl, it's Purdy's job. But either way, I think Lance's leash is a little shortened now. Like if Lance goes off next year and he starts 2-4 or something, you probably go back to Purdy. But
Mhm.
as opposed to just giving him the whole time. But I still think that's Lance's job to lose going forward unless Purdy actually wins the Super Bowl. In which case, I suppose you can't not start the quarterback who just won you the Super Bowl. But anything else, anything shy of
Absolutely. Yeah.
winning the Super Bowl, anything shy of winning the Super Bowl, I still think Lance is the guy moving forward, or at least he's going to get the best chance to be the guy. I don't think Purdy's going anywhere though.
No, yeah, I can completely see that. I think I completely agree with the point that I think Trey Lance, even though he wasn't very, he wasn't what you expected to see out of him at the beginning of the year. It wasn't what you wanted to see. But he still showed some serious improvement and, throughout like in the games he played and
The
obviously,
preseason he looked good,
yeah, like obviously I feel like he deserves the chance to have his, position back once he comes back. Obviously Brock Purdy's been playing amazing, but they obviously now have like a backup plan that they can trust, obviously. But I did want to say the 49ers defense is absolutely amazing. And possibly their next two games, obviously against the Cowboys. I think that's going to be a really good matchup on both sides because again, the Cowboys have a really talented roster, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But then if they get past the Cowboys, possibly the Eagles, who also might be the only team in the league with a roster on par with the amount of like elite players and really good players like San Francisco. So that could also just be an absolute shootout kind of game or a defensive game. You never really know. But I did want to say the Seahawks offense played really well. Kenneth Walker averaged 4.2 yards per carry. He had 60 yards and a touchdown. And then Gino, up until I think the fourth quarter as well, only had a few incompletions and he was lights out in the first quarter, the first half. I'm pretty sure he only had one incompletion
hmm
on like 15 or 16 pass
Yeah,
attempts,
he was
two
he was like
touchdowns.
he was like 13 or 14 when they brought the stat up at some point in the first half. He was playing great.
Yeah, and obviously, like Declan said, DK had a great game. But I think we can all agree
I
that the Seahawks kind of. What were you gonna say?
I was saying, I think the Seahawks. I think we should talk about a little bit their future because their season's obviously over, but they I think are in one of the best spots in the league as far as building for next year forward. If they can keep Gino,
Mhm.
which I think they want to. I think Gino wants to be there. But with that Rams pick, or sorry, the
They're in a
Broncos
great
pick.
spot.
The Lions have the Rams pick. With the Broncos pick, it's a top five pick. You're getting a premium player that playoff teams do not get. You have two first round picks, one super high, two second round picks, one
Mhm.
super high in the second round. and they have cap flexibility. They already have most of the pieces on offense, right? They have two bookend tackles that are elite young players. Cross had a bad game. He had a few false starts, but it's rookie
Mhm.
stuff. He'll get better with that. But Cross had a good season. So did Abe Lucas. Kenneth
Yeah.
Walker's clearly their running back of the future. They have two wideouts that they love. Noah Fant was solid for them, and Geno can be their quarterback. They can just go in and invest a bunch of draft capital on defense this year, where they already hit at cornerback with Tariq Woolen, and they have some defensive pieces here and there. They'll get Jamal
Mhm.
Adams back next year. I think Seattle could be a serious contender if they hit on their picks and get some good contribute. If they can draft as well as they did this year, as they did this coming draft, um, they'll be contending for winning that division and contending for a Super Bowl. That team
No.
has a super bright future, which is
Mhm.
shocking considering how dire it looked after they traded Russ. And it's like Drew Lock and Geno Smith, and we're starting
Everyone
two
thought that they
rookie.
were going to be a
Yeah,
bottom
we're
team in
starting
the league.
we're
Yeah.
starting two rookie tackles, and I like Jordan Brooks, but there's he's not a he's that's one of their best players, and he's good but not great. And it's like, oh, they really surprised me. And Pete Carroll's a great coach, and I think he can get this team back into serious contention in these next few years.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. I think that they're in a good spot. And I think in their first round pick, because we can kind of get into this a little bit. Obviously, we're going to get into the draft more down the road, but they are in a perfect spot to get a premier playmaker and difference maker on the defensive side of the ball and
Oh
with
yeah,
their first pick.
if
They're
if the
probably looking at
quarterbacks,
one of,
yeah, I would say if the quarterbacks fall the way that they might, if somebody's super high on Will Levis and they're willing to move up for him,
Mhm.
they could end up with one of Carter or Anderson, and that would be
No,
that
yeah.
would be so huge.
Obviously, Carter and Anderson are probably easily the top two in the defensive side of the ball. But then there's also like Miles Murphy and Brian
Mm-hmm.
Brzee. They could get one of those guys as well. They're in a really good spot. They also have that second first round pick, which is their
Mm-hmm.
own. Um, but yeah, I just think that the big reason that this game kind of turned out the way it was uh, mainly probably the Seahawks defense just couldn't keep up. They have a solid run defense, I guess, and all right a pretty good pass defense with Woolen and Diggs, and uh, you know they have a solid passing defense, but I think their big weakness was rushing defense, and I think they can definitely beef up on the defensive line coming into the draft. And yeah, I think they can really quickly turn this season into a positive, this end of the season into a positive, and I think that they're gonna only get better from here on out because this is even with just Geno, the rest of the team is a really young team. I mean, DK is young, Lockett's getting up there in age, but Walker's young still. Obviously, he's a rookie. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
you know, Woolen's a rookie. They have a bunch of Jordan Brooks, obviously in coming off an injury, but still young.
Mm-hmm.
But they have a lot of talent, a lot of young talent on this team. And yeah, I completely agree. I think
Diggs
they're only gonna,
Diggs
yeah,
playing
I
well
think
at
they're only
safety.
gonna, they're only gonna get better from here on out. But yeah, moving on from this game, we're gonna
This one
talk
was
about
fun.
probably one of the best games ever in
Yeah.
NFL history. Chargers Jaguars 31-30. The spread was plus 2.5. Um, this is like one of the most incredible games to witness. Watched it all the way through, all of us, and I mean, what the hell happened?
That's probably. I have no idea how they managed to blow that, but I do have an idea, but it was embarrassing, and I'm pretty surprised Brandon Staley still has his job. Although
Hmm.
I'm not totally against them keeping him. I kind of think Staley has some redeeming qualities, even though he blew that one pretty bad. But um, yeah, we can get into the Chargers offense started off, it was good, but it wasn't. It was really just Lawrence giving them the ball in good field position, and then Herbert was executing and getting the ball down the field. But really, where the game fell apart was the Chargers and Joe Lombardi, who's now gone, and we'll get into that in a minute. I think that's
Hmm.
very good for Herbert and that offense, but they could not run the ball for their lives in the second
Yeah.
half. Austin Eckler is a great back, but he's not a workhorse. He's not a guy you can take 25, 26, 27 carries.
Hmm.
And that offensive line is not an offensive line without Slater and with how banged up they've been all year that was going to be able to just pound the rock and run the rest of that game out the way they should have. Um, they they simply could not execute on the ground, and the way Joe Lombardi has designed that passing offense, if Jacksonville locked down on those underneath hitch routes
Mhm.
that they like to run, those stick routes they like to run, and they just could not move the ball in the second half. There's a bunch of 3-and-outs. Some you get one first down and punt. Um, the Chargers, I think Jacksonville had obviously a terrible first half, and they executed perfectly on offense in the second half, but they only got the ball 4 or 5 times in the second half. I think I think Jacksonville certainly deserved that win, but I think the Chargers blew it more than Jacksonville took it because Jacksonville didn't force any turnovers. There was no turnovers. The
Mhm.
Jacksonville didn't get the ball back. There was no big defensive play. The Chargers had 5 turnovers forced, and the Jaguars had 0, and Jacksonville still managed to win that game. That should not be possible.
Yeah.
Alas, it was.
It was just like this game was just really like I said right when we were talking about this, like it was incredible to witness this happen. Just an absolute meltdown, and you really couldn't think it was possible. I mean, at one point this game was 27-0, and it ends 31-30. Like it's just horrible. Like you can't even fathom something like that happening. And yeah, I think like you said, Declan, the biggest thing to point your finger at when you're looking at the Chargers this game was their lack of rushing attack in the second half was just abysmal. Like it was just embarrassing. Like you said, Austin Eckler is not a workhorse kind of guy, but 2.7 yards per carry against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Are we serious? Like we can
That's
like you
not
got like
good.
they can definitely do better than that. And I mean, Gerald Everett is your leading receiver in the game, and your next closest is 40 yards behind on the same amount of catches, which is Keenan Allen. I mean, I like Justin Herbert needs a deep threat. And this is obvious, but their one sort of deep threat, obviously he's not a fast guy, but Mike Williams, who
Yeah.
you see him as a guy that you can just throw it up to, and most of the time he's going to come down with the ball. You know, he got hurt because Brandon Staley decided to play him the week before when there was absolutely no reason to. And I just think the big blame for this loss has got to be on the coaching staff and Joe Lombardi and Brandon Staley, because this is really bad for the Chargers as a franchise, because I feel bad for their like 12, 15 fans right now.
Yeah.
Um,
I
it-
uh I the um oh shit, I lost my train of thought. I was gonna get into Lawrence real quick.
Mhm.
Um Lawrence looked about as bad as you can look
Yeah, four
for
interceptions
for a
straight, four
first
straight
half.
interceptions.
4 straight interceptions, and I credit to Brandon Staley because he drew up some creative defensive stuff and that he's been running. He's Brandon Staley has some flaws, obviously, and I think he starting Mike Williams in that meaningless game was a mistake. And some of the clock management stuff, some of it he's had some problems, but I also think Staley is a excellent defensive play caller, defensive design guy, and I think he did a really good job showing Lawrence stuff he hadn't really seen, and Lawrence
Mhm.
kept kind of compounding on the mistakes. I thought for sure Lawrence was done in his own head, but credit to him, he never, he never thought they were out of it. He never
Mhm.
stopped because we've seen guys take Kyler Murray last year, kind of similar situation. The first overall pick from the year prior, um, or maybe it was 2 years prior for Kyler. But regardless, the first
Yeah.
overall pick recently starts kind of slow in a playoff game, and Kyler, his body language was terrible, and he was pouting around in that Rams game, and they just got absolutely blown out. They had no chance at any point in that game. Lawrence didn't let any of that stuff affect him. He didn't get conservative on his throws. He stayed aggressive, and he was that second half, for as bad as that first half was, that second half was equally brilliant. I didn't see a single miss on his part in the second half. He was perfect, and I think he's kind of put himself in that he's clearly at least has an argument for top 5 quarterback. I think he's
Mhm.
in that echelon. I'd have him probably around 6. Him and Herbert, I guess as a discussion now, I'd still take Herbert for now, but Lawrence is ascending. And I think that Jaguars team's going to be. I think they're going to put up a fight against Kansas City. I think Kansas City wins, but I don't want to get too far into that. But
Yeah.
I think they're going to put up a fight, and it'll be a good game. And I think Jacksonville's here to stay. And then one more thought on the Chargers, like you mentioned about their deep threat in Mike Williams. Mike Williams truly is their only vertical passing threat on the
Mhm.
entire team. And without him, they are so helpless spacing the field out. Um, if you think about it like a basketball team, you gotta have the spacing to get better shots around the rim. And people sometimes make the analogy, you should build your receiver room kind of like a basketball team with somebody do all these different roles. And
Mhm.
Mike Williams was their only vertical threat. They need to I like Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, but they need to seriously rework that receiver room. And you don't need, Mike Williams is a one. He's a wide receiver one. And Keenan Allen, even at this age, he's not what he used to be, but even at this age, he's a more than capable, an elite wide receiver two at this point, at the worst.
Mhm.
You need vertical threats outside of that. Josh Palmer and DeAndre Carter isn't cutting it. There's guys out there, maybe a guy like Mecole Hardman is a free agent. That would be interesting,
Mhm.
right? Something like that. You need a burner and guys who can get some separation. Like Jacksonville added Christian Kirk. He's a separator. He's a good route runner and he's fast. He's a separator. You need a separator, somebody who can get some space. Now that Lombardi's gone and you're going to be running probably a more modern offense, a more sophisticated vertical passing game. You're going to need some guys who can get separation because for as good as Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are, Keenan Allen can get some underneath separation. Mike Williams gets like no separation. He just wins jump balls. But everybody, it's good to have a receiver like that. But sometimes Herbert doesn't want to just trust him. He wants to see open guys every once in a while, as opposed to I guess I'm going to throw it up to him.
Mhm.
Um, and they both have injury problems, so they definitely need to get deeper on the receiver room. And I'm curious to see who they hire as their offensive coordinator. I think Michael Fleur would be interesting, the former Jets offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
But there's some names out there. We'll see where they go. I'm certainly interested to see where they go with that.
I am too. Yeah, I am too. And I did want to talk about, I wanted to give a shout out to Doug Peterson, an
Oh yeah.
absolute great coaching effort, kept his team motivated, and, had the absolute massive, huge sack of balls to go for two,
Hmm.
uh,
I
and get it with a QB
yeah.
sneak, um, which basically won them the game there. But,
Yeah.
most coaches won't call that. And, especially in a playoff game, but the way Doug Peterson was thinking, I guess they had nothing to lose at that point. Um, and yeah, they
Yeah.
got it. And just shout out to Doug Peterson.
Yeah.
And also Travis Etienne had a great game. He had over 20 carries, 109 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. No touchdowns, but still a really promising team here with the Jags that just move forward and beat a team like the Chargers. Um, and they're only going to get better next year as well with Calvin Ridley coming in. This
Hmm.
team could also be pretty scary for a really long time. And this is probably just the beginning for them because they have a
Yeah.
really young roster.
And one more thing on the Doug Peterson front. I think it's interesting that Jacksonville won this game going for a huge fourth down, going for a huge 2-point conversion. Doug Peterson's always been aggressive like that. I think one of Brandon Staley's best traits, one of the best advantages he gave the Chargers was his aggressiveness on fourth downs and 2-point conversions. And I think he kind of shied away from that out of fear of losing his
Losing the
job because I
game.
think losing the game and losing his job because of the way Chargers ownership has historically been reactionary to that kind of stuff. They don't like when they don't, and they can be cheap, and Chargers ownership has been questionable over the years. And I think that has really hurt him as a coach is him kind of shying away from what he did. I think the Chargers win this game if there's a few fourth downs on those series in the second half. The last one comes to mind. It was 4th and 2 on about the 30-yard line. And Brandon Staley from a year ago probably goes for that, knowing damn well the Chargers haven't been able to stop Trevor Lawrence for 3 straight series. And the defense is exhausted because they've just been out on the field all the whole half because the Chargers haven't been able to move the ball. And I think 4th and 2 on even on that deep in his own field, I think last year's Brandon Staley, like we saw against Kansas City, like we saw him do against the Raiders, he was super aggressive. He's like, we're going to try and end the game here, and we're
Mhm.
we're going for this fourth down. I think you never know if it would have worked, but it worked for Doug Peterson, and I think that aggressiveness could have paid off. And hopefully Staley can get back to that, and hopefully with a new offensive coordinator and a refreshed mind, realizing his job is certainly on the hot seat going into next year if they don't get to where they need to go. Hopefully he goes back to what made him successful to begin with.
Yeah, I do think that that'll be a big storyline going into next season. Is Brandon Staley's job is this next year will be to decide if he's
It's
going to
make or break.
Yeah. But what a great game that was. So we're going to move on to the Bills versus Dolphins. Just surprisingly, actually, like a really good game. 34-31 Bills. They pulled it out. The Bills, looking back at this game and looking at the stats, the Bills' offensive line let up a lot of sacks on Josh Allen. I don't know the exact number, but the Dolphins were able to get to Josh Allen a lot. They have a really aggressive defensive coordinator, and they send blitzes all the time, which is a big part of that. But to have a quarterback like Skylar Thompson and have him play the way he did, 18 for 45, 220 yards, 2 interceptions, had 1 touchdown, but to be able to stay in that game with the team of the caliber of the Bills is pretty impressive. So good on Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins defense for playing really well.
Yeah, Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb had a masterclass performance on those edge rushers there. I wasn't comfortable betting the 13.5 line, as I stated, but I certainly thought Buffalo would win comfortably. Maybe Miami would have a backdoor cover, but that's not at all what happened. Miami was absolutely in this game live to take it until the very end. Skylar Thompson was surprisingly competent, is I guess how I would put it. I certainly didn't think going into this game I'd be saying, man, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle need to do more for Skylar Thompson. I certainly didn't think that's how I would view it, but Jalen Waddle had a few big drops. Tyreek Hill had a big drop. I think Skylar Thompson played well enough to win that game, and the Dolphins just came up a little short. I didn't think they had a shot at all, but Josh Allen did not play well. Josh Allen kind of a roller coastery game. He kind of had some real bad turnovers, which he's kind of had problems with since mid to late October. He'd led the league in total turnovers this year, or at least total fumbles plus interceptions. Not all of those fumbles were lost, but Josh Allen is going to have to clean that up if he wants to beat Cincinnati or Kansas City. Maybe not Cincinnati with how they're playing and how their offensive line looks, but certainly if he wants to beat Kansas City or even Jacksonville in the AFC Championship game, if somehow that happens. The AFC is looking a little weaker than we had looked, or at least a little more vulnerable than we had expected. We expected a few juggernauts out here. But yeah, as far as my thoughts on the Dolphins, they're kind of they're not in a great spot moving forward. They're in a really tough spot to improve their roster. They're missing a bunch of draft picks. With the way they're received, with Tyreek Hill's getting paid, and they're gonna have to make a decision on Tua soon. It'll be interesting to see. We've talked about these other wild card losers. The Chargers, they have Justin Herbert. They'll be okay. They'll figure something out. Seattle has such a great future with all their draft capital and flexibility. Miami, I think they'll be okay, and I love Mike McDaniel. I think he's a great coach, but they're not nearly as in a, I think they have one of the bottom 3 draft capital rankings in the league as far as if you go to Tankathon and check their like ranking of their draft assets. I wouldn't be surprised if Miami, given that division, Buffalo's going to stay a contender. If the Jets find a quarterback, they might be better than Miami next year. And New England's always live to be 8-9 or 9-8, so long as Belichick's there. And if they can get a little better, they're viable to win 8 to 10 games. So Miami's going to be in a tough spot to get back to the playoffs next year. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to kind of talk about the Bills here for a little bit. Josh Allen, 23 for 39, 352 yards, 3 touchdowns, and those 2 interceptions. He was okay.
3 fumbles too.
Yeah, you do want to see a little bit more from him though against a team like the Dolphins. But I did want to say Gabe Davis had an amazing game, and it seems like he just turns it up in the playoffs. 6 catches, 113 yards and a touchdown. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
I say it's a weird phenomenon. Playoff Gabe Davis, he left a
Yeah.
lot to be desired in the regular season, but in the playoffs, man,
Mhm.
Gabe Davis, it's 2 years in a row now. Gabe Davis just shows up in these playoff games. It's kind of
Mhm.
crazy.
No, yeah. And I also did want to say Matt Milano is becoming one of the best defensive players in the league. He had, I think, 10
Top three
tackles and
inside
2
linebacker.
sacks. He is just amazing. And, he's come onto the scene as well for the Bills defense, which has also played really, really well. Um, and, kind of got bailed out a little bit in this game with Jalen Waddle dropping a bunch of passes and Tyreek Hill not being really the Tyreek Hill we know. But their defense has also been playing pretty well
Yeah,
with Matt Milano,
yeah.
Jordan Poyer, Ed Oliver, and all them.
Shout out Kyer Elam. He had a
Mhm.
fantastic game. Kyer Elam was fantastic. If he can play like that for the rest of the postseason, opposite Tre'Davious White, that's a very formidable corner duo, and they're going to need it next week for Chase and
Mhm.
Higgins. They're going to really need it.
Yeah, and I guess we can move on with that point to Ravens Bengals now, since we were just talking about Chase and Higgins. We already talked about this in a little bit, so this would be a little quick analysis here, since we had a full hour-long pod that you guys can go check out talking about this game. But Bengals Ravens 24-17 Bengals. The spread was -9.5. And the Bengals are a team where they really looked, even while winning the game, they looked really subpar against the Ravens. Um, you know, Joe Burrow played like pretty well, but then when you look at the defense giving up a bunch of yards to that Ravens offense with Tyler Huntley, no receivers really. Eli Apple getting absolutely cooked by Demarcus Robinson, who's like,
Not that good.
yeah, like a wide receiver 3-4 kind of guy cooking the Bengals' best corner. You wonder the atrocities that Stephon Diggs is going to do to this man next week, and Gabe Davis as well. You're kind of just a little worried about the Bengals going into next week. And if it wasn't for that really horrible QB sneak play call and miracle fumble recovery and return with a block in the back, no call, um, the Bengals would have most likely lost the game to the Ravens and Tyler Huntley. So, it's a really interesting thing to talk about here with
Yeah.
this game coming up next week.
Yeah, I actually think so. I think Joe Burrow played really well given the circumstances, but I actually think that might be cause for concern. I think Joe Burrow looked awesome. I think the Ravens were
Mm-hmm.
playing a mostly too high look the whole game. They had too high safeties. They weren't going to get beat deep. They weren't going to let them beat you on one big play. So they were
Mm-hmm.
playing too high and letting them take the underneath stuff. And Joe Burrow did a really good job not getting impatient. He was taking the underneath stuff and he was, taking his 8 yards, taking his 12 yards, and he was doing well. And Jonah Williams got hurt in this game. And then that O line is now, they're missing 3 starters on that O line. They went through all this trouble to make the offensive line much better. And now they added Ted Karras, they added Alex Kappa, they added Lael Collins, and now Alex Kappa's not there, Lael Collins isn't there, and Jonah Williams isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So Joe Burrow was then forced to. Joe Burrow last year took these huge number sacks, 9 sack games, 8 sack games,
Mm-hmm.
because he had no offensive line and he was sitting there trying to get the deep shot anyway. I think Joe Burrow has improved significantly where he's taking these underneath shots and he's taking what he can get with the time he has and evading sacks when he has to. And he took 4 sacks in this game, but the Ravens got home more than 4 times. Burrow did a good job getting the ball out and evading sacks. I think Joe Burrow played great, but the offense still only put up 17 points. Um, and with those weapons, putting up 17 points in what I thought was a really solid Burrow performance is a little concerning. With that said, the Ravens defense has given Burrow problems all year. The first
Mm-hmm.
2 matchups were 2 of his 3 worst games of the season, total yardage and passer rating wise. This one was also a little bit of a struggle for him. He was fine. He didn't have he had a touchdown, 200 and some yards, pretty good efficiency. He was solid, but he certainly wasn't a world beater. Um, and that Cincinnati defense certainly left a lot to be desired in the run game. Now the Ravens are an excellent running football team, so I'm not all that concerned that Buffalo or Kansas City is going to be running all over them. But Their corners are worrisome. Since they lost to Woozy, it's been a little scary with Eli Apple out there, and I think that could be a problem in these coming
Mhm.
playoff games. I'm not overly concerned. AFC North playoff football is always going to be close. That's why when we said last week, we said we're taking the Bengals to win, but the Ravens are definitely covering 9.5. There was never going to be a scenario where an AFC North playoff football game is, nobody scoring 35 points in that game.
Mhm.
Um, so it was always going to be a close game. So I think they kind of avoided what seems like it could have been a little bit of a trap game.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't feel super confident in them, but I don't feel any less confident in them than I do about, Buffalo after that performance against Miami. So I'd put those two teams about even ground going into their matchup next week.
Mhm.
And I'm not overly concerned about either, but I'm not feeling as good about those teams as I did, 4 or 5 weeks ago.
Mhm. Yeah, it'll definitely be a good game next week. Two high caliber teams. Hopefully we get a really good game. But I did want to say, as Ravens fans here, I did want to give a shout out to three players. We're not going to use PFF that much here on the Bird Rights podcast, but I did just want to, give them a shout out because of this. Kyle Hamilton, Justin Houston, and Odafe Owe, all three of them had really big games. Houston and Owe had both had a sack, and then Hamilton had 9 tackles, I believe. He just played incredible against this
Big
team.
forced fumble.
Yeah, he looks like a superstar
Yeah.
and a great pick by the Ravens last year.
Yeah.
So a lot to look forward to as Ravens fans, and especially a really stressful offseason coming up, but a really great effort by a team and by the players. Just the coaching staff letting the team down kind of here, but really good game by both teams. And we're excited for the game next week with the Bengals and the Bills. But moving on, we're going to go to the Giants Vikings game. Uh, we have some things to say about the Vikings here after talking about them last week. Giants 31, Vikings 24. The spread was -3. The Vikings are not, in fact, top 30 NFL team. I think
Nope.
we've come to
No
this
chance.
conclusion now. Daniel Jones is an absolute baller, but though, like talking seriously though, Daniel Jones played absolutely perfectly against this team, did exactly what he needed to do to win this game. And he was just lights out.
Daniel Jones has surprised me in so many ways this year. He wasn't an MVP candidate or anything, but he was certainly very good. Definitely starting level quarterback, clear starting level quarterback quality. And I think it goes to show how important that coaching and situation is to these young quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Because Daniel Jones, if they hire a different coach, say they're the team who hires Nathaniel Hackett, or even not even that bad. Just say they hire a regular coach. Say they um who's a regular coach who was hired in this cycle. The guy, the Eberflus, right? He
Mm-hmm.
seemed okay. But say they hire that. He's not doing what Brian Daboll did for Daniel Jones, because it's not like the Giants have this overwhelming receiver talent there. Their guys actually have played pretty well. Hodges has been okay, and Slayton's been solid, and Richie James has been, a decent slot guy, and they have some pieces there, but nothing elite. Those guys are for the most part wide receiver, low end 2, high end 3 kind of players. But Brian Dable believed in Daniel Jones and built an offense around his strengths. And
Mm-hmm.
Dable, he's one of the most brilliant offensive minds in the league right now. And I think Daniel Jones is going to end up getting a new deal with the Giants. Probably not a huge deal, but he'll get a real money from the Giants to be their quarterback, and I think he deserves it. I think
Mm-hmm.
I have been convinced you can build a successful offense around Daniel Jones. I don't know that you can win a Super Bowl with him. I guess we'll have to see. I suppose you could if you have all the perfect pieces around him, but that's not how you should grade, because there's probably 7 quarterbacks I feel great, 8 maybe, about winning a Super Bowl with. So that shouldn't be the only criteria. But I think Dable built this perfect offense with a lot of movement outside the pocket, letting Daniel Jones run, even having a lot of designed runs in this game. Um, and that offense looked like a buzzsaw against this.
Mm-hmm.
The Minnesota defense is very questionable. But
Yeah.
what should you do if you're a competent, good offense against a bad defense like that? You should do exactly what the Giants did. They moved the ball. with ease. Saquon looked awesome. Their receivers looked solid, and Daniel Jones looked really good. And I think the Giants might be able to put up a fight against Philly, have a real shot.
Yeah, and it's going to be a conference game, an in division in the conference game. I'm not sure, in division game for the Giants and the Eagles, which will probably be a close game, a hard game, just like the Ravens Bengals. But yeah, talking about the Giants here, Daniel Jones really played amazing, not only with his arm, which is kind of surprising because of the lack of receiving talent on the Giants. Isaiah Hodgins was their number one receiver with 8 catches, 105 yards, and a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
Also, shout out to us for our lock of the week. Richie James, under 50.5
Oh
receiving
yeah,
yards.
that
We
hit.
hammered that. It hit. So trust us from now on. I mean, but moving on from that, Daniel Jones played an amazing game with his arm, but not only that, his feet especially had 17 carries for 78 yards. And he was just really good. Saquon also had a really good game, not just on the ground, but in the receiving game as well. The Giants defense has played amazing. And I did want to just move on to that point. The Giants defense played a really great game against Kirk Cousins this Vikings offense, which just has a lot of playmakers. Hawkinson had a good game. But the really important thing, and the thing you can point to for why the Vikings lost here, was Justin Jefferson had 7 catches for only 47 yards. And you just got to give props to Wink Martindale for just kind of shutting him down here with Adoree Jackson coming back.
Yeah, they weren't going to let him beat them. They were going to make sure it was somebody else to beat them, make Kirk find somebody else, and they couldn't do it. They were bracketing Jefferson, making sure he wasn't going to be the one who ended their season, and nobody else could do it. Hawkinson played well, but Thielen didn't have the juice, Dalvin Cook didn't have the juice, and Kirk Cousins certainly did not have the juice to get that done. Kirk Cousins looked fine. Like he made solid plays here and there, but he just, yet again, I feel like he shied away from the biggest moments at the end of that game.
Mm-hmm.
I think Kirk Cousins will be back as their starter next year. With that said, I think that 4th and 8 where he threw it short of the sticks to Hawkinson when he had, I think he had KJ Osborne breaking to the middle of the field. It would have been a tough catch, but you'd rather have a tough catch past the sticks than just throw it to somebody way short of the sticks on 4th and 8 with your season on the line. You could have given Justin Jefferson a chance up the field. But I think Kirk Cousins' time in Minnesota, I think he'll be the starter next year, but I think this kind of marks the end of it. I think they know they have to start looking for a quarterback. Kirk Cousins will be someone's starter for a while, but kind of like we've been getting, with the Raiders, it seems like they're finally moving off Carr. There's been buzz about that for a while. And I think they made that decision, sometime this season, and they're like, all right, time to move on. He's good, but he's not going to put us over the top. Which actually, I don't know that I'd make that decision with Carr. I don't know if you're going to be able to replace him. But for Kirk Cousins, similar. You're not going to be able to find a quarterback better than Kirk Cousins immediately. It's going to be tough, but you're not getting where you want to go with Kirk Cousins. So either you can keep being an okay playoff team, or you can start looking for options there. And I think Minnesota might be. Maybe they move up for Anthony Richardson, something like that. Let Kirk Cousins sit in front of somebody. Kirk Cousins would be a perfect Alex Smith type quarterback to sit and actually. Everyone tries to do the whole, oh, we'll have this guy play in front of the starter, but it never works unless that guy was actually there, right? Because the Steelers signed Mitch Trubisky to do it. You can't sign. That's never going to work. You can't sign Trubisky. Or the Bears tried to. Ironically, the Bears tried to sign Mike Glennon to play in front of Mitch Trubisky. The Bills tried to do it with Nathan Peterman in front of Josh Allen. That lasted all of one half. Same with Tom Savage in front of Deshaun Watson back in the day. There's a large sample size of it. You're not going to be able to keep a guy in front of someone like that unless they're already there. See Jimmy Garoppolo, Joe Flacco, Alex Smith, and I think Kirk Cousins and Ryan Tannehill, actually, if the Titans decide they want to draft a guy. Those are the logical extensions of that. Those two guys are good enough to start and will get a starting job after this year, after the year they're playing in front of somebody, but they'll be good enough to mentor a guy and let a guy actually sit for a whole year. So a project like Richardson might be something the Vikings look into.
And I think when you look at the Vikings here, they have an interesting offseason coming up with, obviously, like you were talking about, their quarterback situation, but also you could definitely see a guy like Thielen being moved this offseason.
Oh yeah,
And some of those defensive players could also get moved. Daniil Hunter's been in trade rumors for a little bit of time now, so you could see him on the move. And also, Dalvin Cook's been playing not up to
not
Dalvin Cook's
great. Yeah,
standards
not great.
recently, so they might have to make some decisions with their running backs as well.
Madison's a
Um,
free agent, so they'll have to figure out
yeah,
what they're going to do with that room.
so it's a very interesting offseason coming up here for the Vikings, but a tough loss for them against the Giants. And then I guess we can move on to our final game here, which was Cowboys Buccaneers. Spread was +2.5. The final score was 31 Cowboys, Buccaneers 14. And the Cowboys really just, I don't want to say slaughtered, but they just really beat down this Buccaneers team with Tom Brady. And you kind of wonder what the future holds for the entire franchise in Tampa Bay, and also what's Brady going to do, obviously.
Yeah, we all, most of us at least, going into last Friday's pod, when Nick was the only one who said otherwise. He said, and we all kind of knew Dallas was the much more talented team than Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
And we all knew that, but we all have been, football fans for the last 15 years, and we've all been spooked by Tom Brady, knowing some bullshit will go his way,
Mm-hmm.
and he'll, sprinkle the pixie dust, if you will, and
Yep.
something crazy will happen, and they'll find a way to win this game 19-17. And when it started and Dallas was missing these extra points, I was like, this is ominous. These extra points
I
are
completely
ominous.
agree.
Dallas, I'm like, they're these extra points are leaving the door open. It's going to be, he missed the fourth. It was 24-0. I'm like, that's conveniently only 3 scores now that he's missed 4 of these things. And they could have had 3 8-point touchdowns with a 2-point conversion. The whole time I'm thinking, as bad as Tampa looked, the whole time I'm thinking to myself, surely there's something coming. Brady's coming
Mm-hmm.
back. But really, that team, the Bucks looked like the Bucks have looked all year. They looked bad. They
Yeah.
didn't. They couldn't hold up front. And Brady's too. I don't blame him. He's old. He's 45, but he's too afraid to get hit now. And if the protection isn't holding, he's going to get rid of the ball, and they get no explosive plays because of it. And Dallas looked
Yeah.
fantastic. That Dallas defense, Micah Parsons was awesome. Micah
Mm-hmm.
Parsons knocked down like 2 or 3 screen passes. He was
He almost
getting
had a pick
past.
six.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He did almost have a pick six. He gave Donovan Smith absolute. Donovan Smith's gonna have nightmares about Micah Parsons moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
That Dallas secondary played really well. Offensively, it was a Dak Prescott. That's probably the best game I've ever seen Dak Prescott play. That's a
I
good
completely
Tampa.
agree. Yeah.
That's a good Tampa defense, and he was picking that thing apart. Dak had some interception issues in the year, but if people were watching the games, Dak had been playing well. Dallas had been averaging 32 points in the games Dak was playing. Dak is one of the 3 or 4 best pure pocket passers in the league, in my opinion. And it's Dak,
Mm-hmm.
Justin Herbert, probably Joe Burrow, probably those 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dak's he was so good. Dak was fantastic. I think Dak has a chance in these playoffs to kind of reestablish. He's kind of always been fringe elite, right?
He's been
Fringe.
considered an elite quarterback.
Yeah,
Yeah.
elite, but fringe. Fringe. He's that tier below the MVP caliber guys,
Yeah.
right? Because you'd have Lamar had won an MVP, Mahomes won an MVP, Allen everyone thinks is eventually going to win one. Same with Burrow, they think he might win one, and then Hurts and Lawrence and Herbert
Mm-hmm.
are all guys who are like these are MVP caliber players who could potentially win. Dak has always been kind of the first name after that grouping, and the
Yeah.
guys in front of him have shifted around. But I think Dak can put himself in the conversation with some of those guys, like a Lawrence, like a Herbert, if he continues to play like this, because that was a fantastic game. He was picking apart the defense. He found Schultz on a couple seam routes and zone coverage
Mm-hmm.
that were impressive. He found that, he did this without, he didn't target, he got CeeDee Lamb on a few, but he wasn't just, targeting CeeDee Lamb over and over again. He was spreading the ball around to a bunch of solid but not great receivers and finding the gaps. And Dak had an impressive performance. And I'm curious to see how he looks against the Niners, because that is as good as Tampa's defense is, Tampa's a solid defense. It's certainly not the Niners defense. So we'll see how that looks. But if Dak can keep playing like that, Dallas could make some real noise. And that
Mm-hmm.
game against the Niners is going to be a really big one. I think
Yeah.
Dallas has been up and down all year, so maybe they get absolutely stomped on. But if they play like they did this week, they'll have a shot against San Francisco for sure.
Yeah. Just a really good game by Dak Prescott, who, like you said, had some concerning games coming into the playoff game. That game against the Commanders was abysmal.
It was
And
awful.
yeah, and he just completely flipped and did a 180 and had an amazing game. And he did this with CeeDee Lamb only getting 4 catches. It was everyone else that made plays. Tony Pollard had a good game, like he's been doing all season. But Dak with 5 total touchdowns here had a great game. But I think I want to focus more on the Buccaneers and their future going forward. Tom Brady could retire. I don't really see a reality where he stays with this team. It's either he's gonna retire or he's going to a different team.
I don't
I
think
think
he's
we both
retiring
agree that
either.
Las Vegas is probably the number one option for him right now. But yeah, I just this Buccaneers franchise looks like it's going to be in a really tough spot for the next few years coming here. They're
Yeah,
gonna have to really blow it up. I think Chris Godwin could be on the move in the offseason. I think Fournette could be on the move in the offseason. A lot of these defenders possibly. They
I'm
just
sure Levante David might retire,
yeah, Levante David might retire. They have guys like Devin White, Antoine Winfield who are younger, Vita Vea, but I feel like one of those guys might be on the move as well.
Shaq Barrett probably gone. Like
Yeah,
the
Shaq
way
Barrett.
they structured this team is they're kind of push the problems to the future while they had Brady, and those problems are
Yeah,
going to come back. And they really should not make the same mistakes that the Saints made, where they're like, all right, Breeze is gone, now let's contend with Jameis Winston, and they kept
yeah,
pushing the problems down because now the Saints are in this really deep hole. I think Tampa's gonna have to bite the bullet for a year and be pretty fucking bad. They're going to be real bad next year if they do this the right way. And
yeah.
maybe that lands them a quarterback like Caleb Williams or Quinn Ewers or something like that. But
Yeah,
I
I think that's probably what's going to happen here. And props to the Tampa front office for being able to keep all their first round picks for their future coming up, because those are going to be really important for this
yeah
team. But I also want to focus on Tom Brady here because this was quite an interesting game for old Tommy boy here.
yeah
66 pass attempts for 45-year-old quarterback. This has kind of been the theme for him the past 2 years. He's had over 1,400 total pass attempts in the past 2 seasons combined, setting the record for most pass attempts in a season back-to-back years. Last year he had 719. This year he had 733. And I just, Tom Brady's given I think every NFL fan nightmares, but I do kind of feel for the guy. His arm has probably been through the
dead.
ringer these past 2 years,
Yeah,
and obviously his entire career. But to have his attempts and his usage kind of go up for a quarterback at an age like this is probably really tough on him. And this is going to be a big offseason for the Bucs coming up here. But yeah, I feel like this entire season for Tampa Bay kind of just this game kind of explains how their entire season went. It was just really odd. You had really high expectations for this team coming into the season, and to have them finish under 500 and to have them lose a game like this to the Cowboys, it's just really odd for a Tom Brady led team. And I was thinking kind of before the first pod, before we kind of talked about our predictions, this is kind of how Brady looked in his last year in Tampa, or in his last year in New England as well. He was okay, but he didn't really look like the Tom Brady we all knew. And he was like that and lost the first round of the Titans in last year in New England. Then he joined Bruce Arians and he looked like a completely rejuvenated quarterback. And now without Bruce Arians again, kind of looks like what he did with his last year with Belichick. So kind of an interesting thing here with Brady, and a really interesting offseason coming up with him, and where he's going to go and what he's going to do.
yeah. I don't think he retires. The way he was talking post game, it didn't seem like a goodbye. It
Mm-hmm.
seemed like a
Thank you.
goodbye. It seemed like a thank you, Tampa, not
Yeah.
goodbye, everybody. So
Mm-hmm.
even if he says he's going to retire, I don't believe him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I think he'll be back probably in Vegas. Maybe the Jets or maybe the Niners. Maybe the Niners. If they lose to Dallas, maybe they want to make a move there or something like that and let Lance or Purdy sit another year behind Brady. But I think Brady will be back somewhere with a premier wide receiver one, with a coach he likes, and he'll get,
It
I
just
think, at
seems
least,
like Vegas is a perfect scenario for him at this
yeah.
point in his
But
career.
Gene Josh
So
McDaniel, the relationship with McDaniels, Devontae
Devontae
Adams is
Adams,
there,
yeah,
Waller is there. They have the tackle. Is it Colton Miller there, or is he in
Colton
Denver?
Miller, yeah.
Yeah, Colton Miller's there. He's playing well. Um, and Brady will bring some guys with him. I'm sure,
And
they'll sign.
Chandler Jones, a former teammate, plays for them
Yep.
now.
Yeah. I think Vegas feels like the spot, but we'll have to see.
Yeah. And I did want to say quickly, this future next season if Tom Brady is to leave, which it's looking like they're probably going to turn to who did they draft a few years ago? Guy out of Florida in the second round.
Kyle Trask,
Kyle Trask will probably be their quarterback this next year, which
that's gonna be
I think is
bad.
going to be pretty abysmal. So, I don't think they take a quarterback in this draft. I think they wait a
No.
year and have Kyle Trask give him a little shot here. It's
Yeah.
probably not going to turn out well, but the Bucks are going to be in a little bit of
I think
a
I
hole
think
here for the next few
I
years.
think the Bucks' best course of action is clearing their books, letting if Kyle Trask blows you away, great. If he's
Hmm.
as bad as I think he's going to be, also great. You're going to get Caleb Williams or Quinn Ewers or some, especially if you get the one pick, because I certainly think that's on the table with how that much they might have to clear the books. They'd be set for 2 decades after that. So
Hmm.
I think I think suck for a year and then go with Caleb Williams or one of these quarterback prospects is probably their best course of action.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I just think it's going to be a tough few years for the Buccaneers fans. But you guys got a Super Bowl out of Brady. You guys got a
Yeah,
Super Bowl from
that's
him
what you
coming
play
here, so
for.
it was worth it.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
what you
worth
play
it.
for.
Yeah. So, but moving forward, from the games, we're just going to talk about some of the news stories here, just to end this podcast off. Kind of a short thing here. We only have 3 points that I kind of came up with to talk about. Firstly, Jim Harbaugh committed to staying back in Michigan for another year. So off the table for a lot of these teams who are really interested in having him possibly be their coach. But uh, I don't know. It kind of seems like it's going to take a lot to get him away from Michigan in that contract that they have him on.
Yeah. Jim
Um,
Harbaugh would have been a great hire for a number of these teams. He's a great
mhm,
coach, but he always was going to stay at Michigan. This was always just a way he's not paid quite like the Lincoln Rileys, the Lincoln Rileys of the world, Nick Sabans of the world. And I
mhm.
think he thinks he's on a level of those coaches. And I think he has a fair point, the Dabo Sweeneys of the world. So I think this was always leveraged to get more money out of Michigan, and I think it probably worked. He'll get more money, and he loves it there. I don't see him leaving
Yeah.
until he really feels like he's gone. He's maybe if he wins a national title, he'll leave because he feels like he's done what he's needed to do there. But yeah, I think Jim Harbaugh would be a great coach in the NFL, but I don't
Mhm.
see him leaving Michigan. And I'm sure there'll be a rumor every season. They'll be like, Michigan, ooh, this team's interviewing Jim Harbaugh, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of staying on the coaching side of things, this also is greatly going to increase the trade capital that the Saints are going to net for Sean Payton,
Yep.
who's looking to more likely to come back this next season.
Yeah.
So, Jim Harbaugh committing to stay in Michigan is going to only make the Saints get a lot more for Sean Payton.
Yeah.
It already looked like I think a tweet came out over the past weekend that said that they were already looking for a first round pick for Sean Payton. And, with Harbaugh going back, the price could only go up from here
Yeah. Sean
for a true
Payton,
for Sean
yeah,
Payton.
Sean Payton went on TV with Colin Cowherd, and because he works for Fox right now, and he talked about kind of the process, and he interviewed with all these teams: Denver, Houston, Carolina. I think the two that are getting the most buzz and are the most interesting are Denver. Obviously, has been
Mm-hmm.
getting some buzz, which I don't quite understand because I think that's a bad spot. But I think not Jim Harbaugh, I think Sean Payton could turn around. But Houston's been getting some good buzz, and that kind of makes a little bit of sense to me because
Mm-hmm.
you have that number 2 overall pick, and Sean Payton could work around. They have a lot of draft capital. They have 2 firsts this year. They have 2 thirds this year. They have another Browns pick the next year. Um, and Sean Payton could pick his quarterback either whether that's Bryce Young or CJ Stroud or Will Levis at number 2, and maybe you give that high second round pick for Sean Payton or something like that, and you can hang on to pick 12 because I feel like pick 12 might be a little high to give up for Sean Payton. But even if it is that pick 12, maybe you give up pick 12 and then, you know, Sean Payton now has his quarterback and it's a good baseline to work from, and you can kind of start your rebuild from there. Um, but yeah, I think Sean Payton's gonna be coaching this year. My guess would be Houston actually.
Hmm.
I think Houston would be kind of because they moved on from Easterby, which is would have been a big problem because Jack Easterby was terrible. But Sean Payton, I think
Ruined
in
that
Houston makes him.
franchise.
Yeah, he ruined that franchise. Was hiding. He was signing NDAs for Deshaun Watson. Jack Easterby was terrible, but and they made one of two of the worst trades I've ever seen, the Tunsil deal and the D Hop deal. But now that they've moved on and Sean Payton can kind of, have his power that he needs within the franchise, and he can handpick his quarterback that he likes from this draft class. And maybe they can hang on to pick 12 and get that quarterback a number one receiver. You're probably going to get another mid round pick for Brandon Cooks.
Hmm.
I think the Texans could be in a better spot moving forward. It's going to be a few years, but I think Sean Payton kind of wants to mold his thing rather than going to Denver and trying to just make the best out of a bad situation. I think he'd rather
Yeah.
mold his own situation. I think Houston's probably where he ends up.
Yeah. I think Houston's a good spot for him, especially with those picks, like you were saying.
Yeah,
And I think having a coach like that who's won a Super Bowl come in and work directly with the rookies, the rookie quarterback that they're probably going to draft, it's probably a really good idea. And if they're able to lock him up, I think they have a really good future in Houston. But kind of moving on to our last point here before we wrap up, kind of sticking on the Sean Payton draft thing in Houston. CJ Stroud officially declares for the 2023 NFL draft. He did that over the weekend. And he waited until really the last minute, but this guy very well could be Houston's next quarterback. So, this could be the guy that if they are to get Sean Payton, this could be the guy that he's working with. And he's one of the top three guys. Him, Young, and Levis are the top three premier guys in this draft. And this is kind of a really big story that started to unfold into people thinking that he was going to stay for a year. And I know, Declan, you were thinking that Ohio State had a huge offer on the floor on the table for him to stay.
yeah,
But he officially commits to the draft, and yeah.
yeah. I think Stroud. Obviously, it's early to get. I haven't done all of my evaluation I need to do for this draft class for the first
Mm-hmm.
round guys, but from what I saw, Stroud looks like a pretty safe quarterback prospect. I think him and Young are going to go 1-2. We've talked about at length how much potential we think Will Levis has there, but there's obviously also bust potential there with kind of how reckless he plays at times. But I think CJ Stroud probably ends up in Houston or Indianapolis. I think Indy probably moves up to 1 to get a quarterback, or maybe they move up to just one spot to 3 or something like that. Or maybe they stay put at 4 and get the other quarterback. But I think Houston and Indianapolis are probably the two spots that end up with quarterbacks unless somebody moves up past those guys. But this is really good news for Houston as well, because if Stroud had not declared and Bryce Young was the only premium sure thing quarterback, not sure thing, but blue chip kind of
Yeah.
prospect at quarterback, um, that price that Chicago could have asked for the first pick would have been huge, and the Houston probably would have had to look into paying it because they need a quarterback real bad, or else they would have been have to wait another year, which I guess wouldn't be the end of the world, but would have been suboptimal. So
Yeah.
we'll see where that goes, and I think Stroud probably ends up in a top 5 pick for sure. Side note: Stroud and Young kind of feels they're not, it's not Caleb Williams, it's not Trevor Lawrence. Kind of feels a
Mhm.
little bit like the Goff Wentz draft class, where it's like there's two
Yeah.
guys that are clearly going to get picked, or Mariota, Jameis, and in
Mhm.
retrospect, those guys weren't great, but
Yeah.
they could have been good. And I think Wentz's career was kind of derailed by injury, but these guys are clearly top 5 caliber quarterback prospects, that aren't quite Andrew Luck or Trevor Lawrence, but guys that are worth picking there, and we'll see where they go. I'm interested to see.
Yeah.
All right, and
Two
so
really good prospects here for the
yeah.
draft.
Yep, and
But
to close this thing, uh, Nick Miller is not here right now, but we did have him send in the Nick Miller question of the day for
let's
the two of
go.
us to answer. I don't have the answer yet. He sent it to me and encrypted it, and I can reveal it once I'm asked. But the question is, who has the record for the best passer rating in their rookie season? Is the answer A, Dak Prescott, B, Dan Marino, C, Ben Roethlisberger, or D, Robert Griffin III?
I already have my answer here.
I have my answer as well. I sent it to him a while ago. I will go first. My answer, did you write yours down?
Yeah,
All right. My answer is Dak Prescott. That's what I think it is.
as is mine. Dak
Dak
Prescott.
Prescott? All right. Let's see. I will reveal his answer. The answer is
Dak
Dak
Prescott.
Prescott.
Yeah.
So we both get a point for that. And yeah, I think that about wraps things up here.
Yeah. Thanks guys for listening to this episode of the Bird Rights podcast. I don't know when our next pod's gonna be up. This one will probably be up Wednesday when you guys watch this or whenever, but catch us next time. Thanks for watching. This is Zach and I was joined by Declan. Thank you.
See ya.
Peace.